a tariff will always help someone and harm someone. And it's going to harm people disproportionately, just depending on who they are.
What drives the economy? Like you always hear about the economy this, the economy that, but like if you could point it down to a couple of things, what kind of drives the economy?
So when we're thinking about countries that grow or economies that grow, we're looking at educated populations or increasing education, innovation. So you want an economy where people are innovating, international trade. We care a lot about international trade. There's a lot of work that shows that countries that trade more grow more. And then a big one is going to be stability and trust in government. So when we look around at countries that don't do very well, there's often corruption in the government that can play a big role in that.
How important is the United States to the global economy?
Pretty important, for a few reasons. So if we just think about currency, the US dollar is the most traded currency, and the stability of the US dollar helps stabilize a lot of currencies around the world. But when we're thinking about just trade, for example, we are one of the largest trading countries in the world. So oftentimes when economists talk about trade, we care about total trade, which is imports and exports. And so you can definitely break those down. As an exporter, the US is the second largest exporter in the world, and that's just behind China. As an importer, we're the largest importer of goods in the world. So we play a very large role in the global economy through trade. In terms of services, so we can break services away from goods. And so even with services, we are the largest importer and exporter of services in the world.
Tariffs are kind of all the talk. Let's kind of start with the basics and then expand a little bit. So a tariff is what?
Okay, so a tariff, you'll hear people say a tariff is a tax. So I would actually like to start by talking about what a tax is and then talk about how a tariff differs from a tax. So what I tell my students is when you walk into a grocery store and you buy something, the price that you pay as the purchaser is going to be different than the price that the firm gets to take home at the end of the day. So I'm going to pay a higher price. The firm's going to bring home a lower price, and that difference is getting paid to the government. So that's a tax, and that, we tax things domestically all the time. So we're kind of splitting that tax. And I think that's really important because oftentimes we think about, the government is taxing the firms, right? Or the government is taxing the consumers, or the government is putting a tax on Canada. And it's not exactly how that works, because what tends to happen is that paying that tax gets split between the buyers and the sellers.
That's a tax, but not a tariff.
That's just a tax. So then if I think about a tariff, how does this look when we're talking about sort of a tax on international imports? A similar thing is going to happen, except so we put a tariff, let's say on Canadian imports, Chinese imports, Mexican imports, and the price that I, as a domestic consumer, pay is going to go up. Now, so I am paying, as a US consumer, I'm going to pay some of that tariff that the government is imposing. It is also true that this will harm the country that's exporting to us, because they will also be paying part of that tariff, but not all of it. Now, what happens though is if I'm in the United States and I'm looking at pens, or so I'm looking at buying a red pen, and there's a tariff on red pens now, and so the price of imported red pens has gone up. What will also happen is that domestically produced red pens also have this higher price. So when we're thinking about, well, why would tariffs get put into place? There's a couple reasons. So one would be we want to raise tax revenue. Maybe I want to punish another country for a variety of reasons. There's a whole bunch of political reasons one might want to do that. And then the third reason is what we think of as a protectionist policy. So if I want to help my red pen producers in the United States make a higher profit, when I impose this tariff, I'm increasing the price that they can sell at domestically. So when we think about steel tariffs, for example, that's helping steel producers in the US because they also get to charge this higher price.
So it makes them more competitive by raising the price that would otherwise be lower. It doesn't lower the price domestically.
It does not lower the price domestically, no. So if we're thinking about, all of the produce that we import from Mexico, if we put a tariff on these imports, then the price that we pay domestically will go up. So basically what happened is prior to World War II, most countries had, or all countries had very high tariffs. And post World War II, there was this sort of communal decision made to reduce tariffs in order to increase global trade. And there's a lot of reasons that we like sort of this move towards free trade. Free trade meaning that there aren't any tariffs. So the more trade we have, the more access to goods we would have that we couldn't otherwise have. There are some rules put into place about when you're allowed to impose tariffs or sort of more tariffs on other countries. And so, for example, in our trade with Canada and Mexico, we are allowed to put higher tariffs in place if there's essentially a state of emergency, if we think that there's issues with protection to our country. Deciding that we want to reduce, let's say, drugs, the flow of drugs into the country could count as an emergency situation, which could allow the United States to sort of legally put added tariffs on our imports.
So when you heard about the most recent tariffs, and we're recording this on March 10th, and use recent however you want to use recent, what was kind of your reaction to it?
So the recent tariffs, what's been very interesting about it is that depending on the day, we don't know if they're going to happen or not. So there's this sort of stability question that's being called into play in a way that hasn't been before. So it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to impose 10% tariffs and then we're just off and running for a certain reason. But to say the tariffs are coming, okay, we'll cancel them for now. Okay, they're coming. It's that sort of on and off again that can actually lead to some of these price increases and stability issues that the tariffs themselves might cause. So even though maybe these 25% tariffs aren't in play right now, the on again, off again nature can create some of the exact same issues that the tariffs themselves would cause.
I could see that because even what the little I know about business, like if I don't know what something is going to be, I'm going to plan for the highest and then budget accordingly.
Or you're going to look for different trading partners.
Do you see some of that kind of already happening?
Yeah. So one thing that's pretty interesting is that, COVID is not in our distant history. And we all remember sort of how the different shutdowns led to the lack of access of intermediate goods and foods at certain points in time. And I think that probably one thing that recent experience incentivized is a sort of more robust network of trading partners so that a country doesn't have to rely on just Iowa to be exporting soybeans to them. They might have a couple different options that they can reach out to in case something happens. And that's just because we did just have this huge disruption in the global economy. Maybe less ideal alternatives, but alternatives that you can turn to.
So does that affect mainly the country that puts the tariff on, or the countries that are affected by that tariff? Like, do Mexico and Canada kind of get burned too? That's what I'm
So
asking.
they will definitely experience consequences, and the reason for that is because the U.S. is their largest trading partners, and so trade with the U.S. ends up being a larger percentage of their trade than our trade with them. So they're a little bit more reliant on us than we are on them. So it will hurt them. It will also hurt us. And also, different partners can be made. So, it's possible that Mexico finds that China will be their new largest trading buddy. Or maybe we'll just sort of make it through a few months and then return to where things were, depending on how things play out.
So I guess, for me sitting here, right? Like, this sounds like a bad thing.
For US consumers,
Yeah, for
yeah.
me it sounds like a bad thing, but what's the reason that could potentially, like, why would this be a good thing for me potentially?
I'm not sure that I could tell a good story about why it would be a good thing for a US consumer. It could, in theory, be good for some US producers. So if we're coming back to those protectionist policies and trying to prop up domestic production, I think steel and aluminum could benefit from these tariffs. But even if we think about car manufacturing, for instance, because I think sometimes we have sort of these old-fashioned stories that we're completely producing cars in the United States. And so if we put a tariff on imported automobiles, that's going to benefit automobile makers in the United States. And unfortunately, even that's not quite so straightforward, which is why they actually got really upset by the tariffs with Mexico and had the initial delay. Most goods that are produced nowadays, and cars are a really great example of this, have a lot of sort of back and forth across the borders. So even a car that's assembled in the United States might have had its engine and its steering wheel come from Mexico. Or it could be that a lot of the parts are produced in the United States and the car is assembled in Mexico. But essentially, in the last 30 years, there's been a huge growth in trade in the intermediate inputs. And so as those get more expensive, the manufacturers also get harmed. Even if you're assembling the car in the United States, you're using more expensive intermediate parts.
Can you help me kind of understand? Like, because, like, okay, I get the idea of it. What I don't really understand is how important in the global scale these kind of things are. So, to use kind of a ranking scale again, if 1 is something that's not super important and 10 is like the most important thing, where would tariffs be on that scale?
So I can't answer it that way. A tariff will always help someone and harm someone. And it's going to harm people disproportionately, just depending on who they are. So someone who consumes primarily domestic goods won't be as affected as people who consume more imported goods, even though we could expect sort of inflationary pressures across a lot of different goods. But the problem is that there is going to be disproportionate effects on people. And I'm not sure exactly, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint people in X state are going to
Yeah.
be harmed more. If we took it to the product level, we might be able to do that a little bit, thinking about who's producing what in different states.
Would you say, though, like, there's some of the tariffs that are being discussed that would be particularly harmful or beneficial in certain areas?
So I think if we're thinking about beneficial, the steel tariffs are beneficial to producers. I think a lot of farmers are already being hurt in ways that were not anticipated. A lot of our agricultural products are exported. And so we have to remember also that if we impose tariffs, we enter a trade war. most likely. And so what we're seeing with other countries is that they're then imposing tariffs on us in return. So farmers who might depend on an export market suddenly are receiving less and aren't able to export as much. And one thought might be, well, okay, that's fine. Like, we'll just keep all the soybeans in the United States, right? We don't need to export them. We'll just keep them here. The problem with that is that there might not be enough of a market for domestic soybeans. And so then if the prices drop so much that it might not even need to be a big drop, but if domestic farmers aren't able to recoup their costs on the soybeans that they've grown, they're kind of out of luck unless aid comes in from the government. And so we've had times like this where the government then gives farm subsidies, which are very expensive as well.
Do tariffs fundamentally change the destination of a country in the sense that, like, does it fundamentally change it, or it just adjusts?
I don't think tariffs alone would fundamentally change anything, unless the tariffs are large enough and sort of if there's enough other countries that can kind of fill your spot in terms of consumption of the goods that you've been consuming, or in terms of supplying the product that you've been supplying, the world market will go to other countries and they'll import and export to other places. And, things could change in terms of, industries globally that become more or less successful. But I don't think tariffs in and of themselves are going to be a huge driver in this.
What does kind of the world look like if the United States isn't number one in terms of exporting and importing anymore?
Ooh, it gives opportunity for other countries to be the major trading partner for our partners. And whether that's a cost or a benefit depends on, I suppose, who you are and what your policy goals are.
Is it the kind of thing, okay, give me some leeway here, right? Like, we're kind of the cool kid at the cool table, right? Like, is there a chance that our current trade policies make it so we're no longer the coolest kid at the coolest table?
Sure.
What impact would that kind of have on us?
So I think that these are really long-term questions, or maybe they're not that long-term. I think that they go along with a lot of other policy questions. So it kind of depends on jointly what we're doing with innovation and, investing in other countries and supporting other governments. So I think it's an administration question and goal. And, I'm not exactly sure what the particular goal of the administration is right now, whether they want to be the cool kid or not be the cool kid, or what the definition is of being the cool kid.
Yeah. If you were running the world or the United States, what would your trade policy be?
Great question. Also not easy to answer. I mean, I think I'm a trade economist. I would tend towards freer trade. That said, I think that you do need to look at an industry by industry level. I think that there are reasons that some products we should have, some of them are. Sometimes we do need to think about national security, right? When we're importing goods or exporting goods. Sometimes we don't want to be reliant on other countries for supplying us with something that we want to be able to have on hand without any sort of, political relationship. So I think that I would just tend towards a more free trade. But also, even when we think about environmental impacts, I care a lot about the environment, and that sometimes means that we need some protections. So it's not black and white.
So if there's good and bad to it, though, is it going to be a situation as it's currently kind of construed that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer?
So if you think about the question, right, what we'd have to look for is where are the policies to help reallocate the wealth or the distribution gains? And if I don't see the policies to help the people who are being harmed,
then it's a net bad thing for them.
right.
Do other countries really watch what's happening with other countries in the sense that, okay, Mexico and Canada are getting hit? Is Australia getting ready for it? Is India getting ready for it? Like, are they all watching and reacting to what the United States is doing?
I'm sure that countries who trade a lot with the US are watching, and they're already making plans for, adjustments.
The big one, right? Are we headed to a recession? And if you can't necessarily answer that specifically, are there things in place that would kind of put us where prices are going to go up or prices are going to go down?
Right. So I think that there's a debate over whether we're heading towards a recession. And, depends on what you're reading and who you're asking. So what I would remind everybody is that the intent behind a tariff or behind these sort of sweeping tariff laws would definitely not be to put us into a recession. That would never be a goal. So I think what a lot of us consumers are thinking about generally is just affordability. So we're kind of worried about groceries and maybe buying a house or building a house and buying a car. A lot of people have been asking me, should I buy a car real quick if I think I need a car in the next couple years? So I think consumers just typically are worried about the prices that they're paying and their ability to afford things. And right now there's a lot of things that are going on that lead to higher prices.